Hey, mini-believer, what the heck are you watching?
I'm watching a freaking video by Spirit Science about the dangers of eating meat.
We won't tell you what to eat or what not to eat. Only that, if health is your concern, you should be equipped with all of the information you can in your mental arsenal to make the best decision for you.
Shut the front door. This is actually a decent video.
You're darn tootin'. Why are you guys talking like that? Like what, you fudge nugget?
Like that! We've always freaking talked like this, you son of a biscuit.
What the is going on? Holy cheese and crackers, we got a yellow alert.
Oh, popsicles, you've done it now.
What have I done? I'm so confused. We've lost attitude control.
Just shut your mouth and take your station.
We're caught in Earth's gravity.
Bridge to engineering. Report.
Oh, hi, sweetie. I'm so happy you called.
Mom, where are my engines?
Oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe the day I'm having down here, Boogaloo. How have you been doing? Did you get that rash checked out? I haven't heard from you since that incident at the petting zoo.
We've entered the atmosphere.
Mom, please, this is an emergency.
I'm trying my best. I used to be able to get these engines to run all month on 2 or 3 of these little green crystals, but lately we've only been able to get these yellow crystals, and they can barely keep the power running. I can't even get the microwave to heat up yesterday's casserole.
What? Are you serious? Why didn't you tell me?
Oh, I didn't want to bother you, sweetie.
Ah, fiddlesticks. Well, you know what to do.
Ah, Captain, setting course for Silicon Valley. What?
I always knew it would come to this. Brace for impact!
We're on target. Oh my god, I don't want to die.
Our history is not what we think. Many things that we've been led to believe to be true simply is not.
Are not? Jesus, Jordan, you're behind a podium, for Christ's sake.
Modern views of our history account for many things, but completely dismiss many very important pieces in the puzzle. For example, the pyramids of Giza. There is no modern theory that accounts for how these could have been made, in such a precise way that even modern technology can't achieve.
I love this ancient Egyptian alternate history stuff, but not only could we build a pyramid today, if we really wanted to, we could make it much more precise than the ancient Egyptians.
Ancient cities such as Babylon, Erech, and Akkad that were written about in the Bible and other ancient texts were always thought to be myths because no one could prove they existed. Inside one of these cities, archaeologists found thousands of cylindrical clay tablets hidden deep within the earth, written in cuneiform, and tell an ancient story that spans back over hundreds of thousands of years on this planet, describing the history of the earth and the origins of the human race in great detail.
How the hell does the fact that Sumeria was in the Bible make the Sumerian texts any more legitimate? The Bible completely contradicts the supposed Sumerian history.
How can we explain how they knew so many things about the universe that would seem impossible to know? Not only did the Dogons know all about the distant planets in the solar system, but so did the Sumerians. They described them all in great detail in these Sumerian records.
You are going right up my alley with this stuff.
They also knew about the precession of the equinox. That's a tough one for a historian to understand, because it takes over 2,000 years of continuous observation to actually learn that the Earth has a wobble. The Sumerians had this information from day 1 of their civilization.
Well, that would be pretty amazing. If it were true.
A man named Zacharias Sitchin spent a long time transcribing these texts and had put them all together in his books. But many others have also done the same, and the interpretations are always very similar.
And by similar, Jordan means completely different.
Not only that, but Thoth has also shared information about this with us, and his account matches the Sumerian records.
Whoa, geez, you never said Thoth was involved.
Adamus and other channelings discuss it as well.
Okay. And by channelings, you mean...
We have been called the bringers of the dawn.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you that this is fact. I am simply saying, decide for yourself.
Well, I don't know, Jordan. Saying that a literal god told you.
Long ago, when humans existed at a very high level of consciousness, We were intradimensional and were very psychic. We communicated through thought and emotion, much like how animals do rather than speaking or writing.
Okay, never mind.
We lived primarily on a large string of islands called Lemuria. We actually found quite a bit of evidence that Lemuria existed.
Lemuria is like the Atlantis myth on LSD. Lemuria was a theoretical land bridge that was hypothesized to explain why there was so much biological similarity in the areas of Madagascar and India. However, that theory is no longer valid, as we now know through continental drift that those two regions were once touching.
But there was a consciousness shift. We moved up in consciousness, and the islands of Lemuria sank beneath the oceans. At the time of this shift, a new continent rose out of the waters. We called it Atlantis.
Doesn't it just grind your gears that modern geology doesn't take this shit seriously?
Back in the early 1900s, the spiritual path of the United States was similar to what's happening today. People began to learn about meditation and study ancient lands like Atlantis and Lemuria.
And Harry Houdini used to debunk the shit out of these people on his spare time. He was the original neckbeard.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Although we were studying this at that time, World War I began soon after, and we lost interest in spirituality and the ancient lands for a very long time.
Did you know that it was around that time that most recreational narcotics were outlawed around the Western world? I don't know if that's connected.
There were about 1,000 humans at a very high consciousness. The Nicals began preparing Atlantis to be our new home. They projected their energies across the surface of the continent in the form of the Tree of Life.
I would have started with some infrastructure.
The Earth itself also has a Kundalini because the Earth is alive, running from the center of the planet to a specific place on the surface. Wherever the Kundalini resides, the people there become the spiritual leaders of the world. After Atlantis, the Kundalini moved to the mountains of Tibet, which is why the Buddhists were the leaders in pure spirituality for the last 13,000 years. It moved again within the last 10 years, but that's a story for another time.
Is it in Colorado? All the hippies seem to be moving there for some reason.
This created vortexes of energy rotating out of each and every circle. Once the vortexes were established, the children of Lemuria began to be called forth. The Lemurian body of consciousness had only reached the age of 12 as a planetary consciousness. Because we were right-brained, we were a female species, like a 12-year-old girl.
Okay. I gotta be honest, I'm not mentally prepared for this discussion.
Each migrating Lemurian was attracted to one of these 8 centers on Atlantis. They settled and began to build cities.
So a bunch of 12-year-old girls followed some shiny snakes in the sky and then built cities there.
That left 2 vortexes with nobody using them.
Nobody?
Not a single person.
Okay, it's your story.
And in life, you can't have an empty place. Life will find a way to fill it.
Phrasing.
Though the Lemurians had only filled 8 of the vortex areas, Mayan records state clearly that there were 10 cities in Atlantis when it fell.
The funny thing with that is that they don't say that.
To fill these 2 empty vortexes, according to Thoth, 2 extraterrestrial races stepped in. The first race were the Hebrews, coming from our future.
Jews are from space. They're also from the future.
The Hebrews were kind of like a kid who went through 5th grade and didn't make it, so they had to do that grade over again. They didn't graduate to the next level of evolution, so they had to do it again.
Oh my god, ladies and gentlemen at home, I am so sorry. I had no idea that this video was going to have anti-Semitism in it. I am embarrassed.
The other race that stepped in caused big problems. These beings came from the nearby planet of Mars.
$5 says it's the space Muslims.
According to Thoth, Mars looked very much like Earth a little less than 1 million years ago.
Boy, that Thoth guy's got some pretty unique information. Completely unverifiably unique.
But something happened to them, and it has to do with something called the Lucifer experiment.
Actually, it was simple nature. Over time, Mars got further and further away from the heat of the sun, which made the molten nickel iron core cooled to the point where the electromagnetic field disappeared, causing the solar winds to strip Mars of its atmosphere, which led to the end of liquid water on the surface.
There is no divine plan. Spirit can do whatever it wants. If Spirit decides to cut itself off from the rest of consciousness and create a separate reality on its own, it can do that too. Because Spirit is God, it can do this. This is called the Lucifer experiment.
Okay, so the Martians are Satanists.
When the Martians severed the love bond, they became pure male, logical beings with no emotions. They ended up fighting. Mars became a battleground. Eventually, it became clear that Mars was not going to survive. They blew their atmosphere away and destroyed the surface of the planet.
This is just classic Mother Goose at this point.
The Merkaba was known in ancient times as the Chariot of Ascension. It is the star tetrahedral energy field around the body. The Merkaba, which is both a tool and part of your being, can be used to do the impossible, included but not limited to changing dimensions and traveling through the universe.
Whoa, we just shifted gears really hard. I'm guessing that the edibles just kicked in.
Before Mars was destroyed, they built huge tetrahedral pyramids. They built 3, 4, and 5-sided pyramids, eventually building a complex that was able to build a synthetic Merkaba.
Jordan, those aren't cities on Mars. That's just a collection of random mountain ranges and space debris.
After a million years or so, it's been eroded, but the proof is there.
A Fibonacci spiral doesn't prove that something's not natural. The Fibonacci spiral is literally used to prove that something looks natural.
Because the Martians were severed from the Unity consciousness, they couldn't create a living Merkaba.
Oh no, that'd be ridiculous.
They created a synthetic Merkaba to travel in time and find a new home.
Now this story is starting to sound legitimate.
A small group of Martians tried to get away from Mars before it was destroyed, and that place they found was Earth. They didn't ask permission. Being part of the Lucifer experiment, they just said, all right, let's do it. And in doing so, they joined and changed our evolutionary path.
I told you, here it comes.
There were only a few thousand Martians who came to Earth through the synthetic Merkaba. The first thing they did when they arrived in Atlantis was try to take over the continent. They were vulnerable due to their small numbers, compared to the millions of Atlanteans, and we finally subdued them.
I can't help but notice that you're us and theming historical figures. I demand that Jordan get a DNA test to prove that he has no Martian in him.
When this happened on our evolutionary path, we now had the planetary consciousness of a 14-year-old girl. Martians were an incredibly male species, and also very old. So what you had was a 14-year-old girl being taken over by a 60 or 70-year-old man.
Okay, I'm still a little uncomfortable with Jordan's island of young girls. I'm glad they're growing up and everything, but it's just making this video hard to make at this point.
The Martians slowly began to implement their left brain technologies, which the Atlanteans knew nothing about. One after the other, the Martians kept putting out these left brain inventions until the Atlanteans slowly began to see things through their left brain. We slowly began to become a male species.
Jordan's against transgenderism too?
The Martians gained control, bit by bit, until eventually they had all of the power, as was their intention. The animosity between Atlanteans and the Martians never subsided, not even till the end of Atlantis. They hated each other. The Atlanteans were shoved down and treated like inferiors. It was like a marriage that the female component didn't like, but the male component didn't really care if she liked it or not.
Wait, so the Martians married the young girls too? Are you sure that they're not... Wait a minute. If you just... and then you... Oh my god, I was right!
In the 1930s, Edgar Cayce was channeling information for a geologist when he stopped and he said, "There's something you should know. In the near future, the Earth's poles are going to shift."
Why should I care what he has to say?
Cayce was a brilliant man with a very strong connection to higher dimensions.
My mistake.
Scientists believed that if there was going to be a physical pole shift, there would also be a change in the magnetic poles.
Yes, scientists believed if you were to physically flip the planet upside down, you would flip the magnetic field. But that's not what a pole shift is.
The last shift that took place was 13,000 years ago.
No, it wasn't.
They did another test and found that it had shifted again 26,000 years ago as well.
No, it didn't.
Scientists also learned that polar shifts happen very quickly. In a single day, the magnetics would do a complete flip, or turn 90 degrees, and within 24 hours, the sun would be rising differently than it did the previous day.
None of that is accurate. A complete pole shift would probably take thousands of years. Our poles do shift around quite a bit. They're nowhere near true north and south at any given moment.
They learned that the surface of the Earth, the crust, could slip over the main mass of the Earth, which continues its rotation as if nothing happened. The crust would rotate and spin out of control until eventually it settles again in a new location aligned with the new magnetics.
A pole shift wouldn't cause that. You should really learn about gyroscopes. I just recently did.
During this time, there are massive earthquakes and tsunamis and devastations that rock the world. Doesn't that sound a bit like the destruction described in the Book of Revelations?
Yeah, it does. Except, an actual pole shift, the only thing that would change is your compass.
Nova did 2 reports on polar shifts, and both times NASA shut them down. Then recently, Nova released a new video called Earth's Magnetic Storm. That video shows all of the evidence for pole shifts without actually using the words pole shift. It's almost as if a specific company doesn't want us knowing about this and the evidence that's been brought forth.
Well, then allow me to be the brave soul to break the silence. Studies of cooled lava beds have allowed scientists to determine that the pole shifts. Also, the study of pottery has allowed scientists to discover that the Earth's magnetic field varies in strength over periods of time. But we don't actually have enough information to be able to tell exactly when this shift last happened. All we know for sure is that we're super overdue for a shift, and it's already happening.
There's one other thing that we need to discuss about polar shifts. They always line up with a consciousness shift.
Right, yeah. I've created this graph to help illustrate your point, Jordan. It's pretty clear that there's a direct correlation.
A piece of Atlantis about the size of Rhode Island sank into the ocean. This caused a tremendous amount of fear within the Atlanteans because they thought they were going to lose the whole continent, like what happened with Lemuria. Because of the consciousness shift, one of the bigger things they lost was their connection to the future. They couldn't foresee big events such as the potential sinking of their home.
Well, I'm really glad you cleared up that plot hole. I would have just been up all night thinking, why didn't they just predict the future?
Between 13,000 and 16,000 years ago, a comet approached the Earth. Because we were living at a high consciousness across all dimensions, the Atlanteans became aware of it before it hit.
So they couldn't predict the future, but they could predict comets.
The Martians, who were in the minority even though they were in control, wanted to blow it out of the sky with their laser technology. However, the Nicals had learned of the comet's true nature, and the Atlanteans protested. They said that the comet was in divine order. They had to allow it to take place naturally. Let it hit the Earth. That's what's supposed to happen. The Martians fought the Atlanteans, but in the end they gave in. The Martians agreed to let it hit the Earth.
Why? That's so stupid. Why?
It came screaming into the atmosphere, plunging into the Atlantic Ocean just off to the western shores of Atlantis, near where Charleston, South Carolina is now. Only that was at the bottom of the ocean at the time.
I suppose that's not impossible, but there is evidence of natives living in North Carolina not that long after that.
A few fragments actually hit the main body of Atlantis, crashing into an area right where the Martians were living, killing a huge portion of their population. They were pissed.
Your lack of empathy for Martians is disgusting. I don't see you laughing at the misfortunes of the Atlanteans.
And when their anger rose to meet their desire for control, they decided to take over the Earth. They began to once again create a complex like the one they built on Mars long ago to try and create another synthetic Merkaba. If they had succeeded, they would have gained control over everything on the planet.
Wasn't that the plot of the last Avengers movie?
The Martians built the buildings in Atlantis. They set up the whole experiment, threw the switch, and lost control. The destruction was immense. In this reality, you can hardly make a greater error than to create an out-of-control Merkaba.
You don't need to tell me.
The experiment began to rip open the dimensional levels. Not the higher ones, but the lower ones. To give an analogy, if you took a knife and slit open your stomach, the stomach acids would seep into other parts of the body that it's not supposed to be in. That's like ripping open the dimensions.
Well, that's colorful.
Because of this tear in the dimensional levels, a huge number of lower dimensional spirits and beings were thrown out of their comfort zone and into these higher levels. They were forced into a world that they did not know or understand. To survive, they needed bodies and began automatically entering into the bodies of people. For every human body, there were hundreds of lower dimensional spirits inhabiting them.
You've already got the Bible, Greek mythos, the ancient mystery religions, literary devices used by Twilight. Do you really need to add Scientology to the mix?
The reason the Nicals were special wasn't just because of their incredibly high consciousness, making them like guides of Atlantis. They also had achieved what today we call immortality. Let's just say they figured out a way to keep their body healthy and young for as long as they chose, and could choose to pass on whenever they desired it. When reincarnating, they do not suffer the great memory loss that we do when we incarnate. They did it through their expanded consciousness and tantric interdimensional sex meditations.
Oh my god, this is like a fever dream. I need a break.
This is how Thoth was a priest king of Atlantis for thousands of years.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
And stayed on Earth until 15 years ago when he gave all of his memories and understanding about sacred geometry to a man named Drunvalo Melchizedek.
Yeah, that's right. Every time Jordan cites Thoth as a source, he's referring to this fucking weirdo in a ponytail. He says that he channels Thoth.
The Martians' attempt at controlling the world took place on one of the small islands in the west of Atlantis. This place today is known as the Bermuda Triangle.
What? This really is just everything the story.
Many planes and boats have reported to have gone missing there, and in many cases, these ships and planes have been sucked into different dimensions, never to be seen again.
Yeah, there are so many cases of that. Let's not go over any of them, though.
They sent most of the lower dimensional beings back and sealed up the dimensional tear. Despite this, all of the economic systems collapsed. Financial, social, and all concepts of how life ought to be completely broke down. Life was no longer about living. It became about surviving until tomorrow. It was a literal hell on Earth. The Nicals had no idea what to do. They were children compared to the events that had been thrust upon them.
You were just talking about how they're immortal. How are they like children? Your story is so inconsistent.
We were going to fall. We were going to hit rock bottom, level 1, the lowest place we possibly could be in the universe and still survive. We were changing polarity. We were no longer a female species, so we were starting from square one as a male species. And finally, and this was the shocker, we would only have 13,000 years to return to Christ consciousness. Normally, it takes hundreds of thousands of years for a species to get to Christ consciousness. We had to do it in a fraction of the time. If we didn't, we would not survive. This has never happened before in the universe ever.
These plot devices are wearing a little thin, but I'll give you this much, Jordan. It's a better story than The Last Jedi.
Thoth, who was the priest king of Atlantis at the time, learned that they would have to perform this experiment on themselves. Thoth proceeded with a being named Ra and Aragat, who were previous kings of Atlantis, and began the experiment. What Thoth and friends had to do was create a synthetic Christ consciousness grid, allowing humans to ascend to Christ consciousness in a very short time.
Avengers assemble.
Many governments of the world, especially the Russian and US governments, were studying our grids back in the 60s and probably earlier. When mapping out the grid on the planet, you find little military bases on many of the nodal points of the grid. There are tons of these bases way out in the middle of nowhere, like on little islands like Guam.
What didn't they fight over in the Cold War?
They were trying to take control of the grid, because if you control consciousness, you control what we think and feel.
Oh my God. You need to learn to trust that your audience will figure some things out on their own.
These men were sixth-dimensional beings at that time and were living at a very high level of consciousness, so whatever they thought happened instantly. It was that simple. Whatever they thought happened instantly.
So they're omnipotent. Well, that's boring. Now I can just skip to the end of the story.
Yes, the grid was completed. Congratulations, Earth. We actually survived.
Yay. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw and you'd like to see more Armored Skeptic, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you absolutely love me, you can support me on Patreon, or if you have a passing affection for me, you can buy my merch. Links are in the description.